Welcome back to Excel for Busy Salespeople. This is Byron Holloway, and it's time to start our intermediate lessons. So, we're going to start here on lesson 7, which is the beginnings of pivot tables. So, I have the document open here, and this is how I normally receive data. If you go back through the earlier lessons, this is the raw data. Then we do the territory lookup, which we've done in an earlier slide, calculated commission rate, the zip code where it sells in, which is where we look this up. Um, so we've got pretty much everything we need to put this information into a good pivot table. So the first thing we need to do is select the data that we want in the pivot table. So I will, using the keyboard, I'm going to start here. I can start and drag. We talked in earlier lessons about how I could just go to start from the top corner and scroll down here and press shift and select to the bottom corner. Um, or I can start at the beginning, press control shift down arrow. Whoops, held it too long. And now I will move over to the right. Now, the reason it jumped straight across is there's no blank spaces there. If there was a gap in between the columns, you'll notice up here there is more data, but it didn't jump to that, so it stopped where the first row of blank cells is. So now I've got all my data selected, and I'm going to choose Insert and Pivot Table. Since I already have the range selected, that's fine. So the table of range is this. I want it in a new worksheet, and I will click OK. So now I'm ready to put together a basic worksheet. It does matter which order you do things in. So I always try to make the most important fields come together first. So I'm going to start by putting my end customer down here in my row labels. And then I'm going to put what I want to add up over here in values. So that's the most important things. There's a couple of little housekeeping chores that I like to do as soon as I set the field up. I'm going to go in here and choose my field value settings. It's already set to sum, which is exactly what I want. And I'm going to go in here to my number format and change it to number, no decimal places, and I like to use the comma separator. So that's just a matter of personal preference, so that's how I always set it up. So now we have the basics of our report. Now this is obviously the total for the entire time. So the next thing I typically do, I don't ordinarily care about my customers as an alphabetical list. I want to know them from largest to smallest. So I'm going to sort this from Z to A. Um, there also in the pivot table tools, you can see there's other information up here that we'll go into a little bit later. So now I know here's my customers from largest to smallest. So what's the next thing I might want to know? Which distributor sold that product, and then which part number did they sell? So this is the default list here in Excel. I personally don't like the data tabulated this way. So again, one of the first housekeeping things that I always do is I go in here, I'm going to right click, I'm going to choose Pivot Table Options, and I will select here under Display Classic Pivot Table View. And then I'm going to also choose the field list to sort it in A to Z order. All right, so now I have my customer, the distributor that sold it, and the manufacturer's part number. Now, of course, each one of these is subtotaled, which in general I don't need. It makes for a pretty cluttered field. So I'm going to remove the subtotal from the end customer. I'm right clicking here, I'm going to remove the subtotal from the distributor, and I will remove the subtotal from the part number. So now I've got a pretty good idea of what we're doing here. With this basic format, there is a heck of a lot that you can do. I can also go in here and put the invoice date. Typically, I'll put that as a column label. So now you can see there's the invoice date that everything was sold on. Oftentimes, we'll go through and maybe filter some of this out, like I'll put my principal up here. And now maybe for whatever reason, I'll change this to select multiple items. This checkbox here may be slightly different depending on your version of Excel. I've kind of chosen a middle-aged version of Excel. If you go back to Excel 2003, this menu is definitely different. If you go through to the Office 365, it's also different. In some of the last lessons, I'll point out some of the key differences, especially between these versions and the 365s. So now maybe I only want to see these two principals. If you're not familiar with these guys make keyboards. These guys make point-of-sale printers. So if I pull them together, again, this is all sort of false data. These aren't necessarily their distributors, but these are the right part numbers. So maybe if I'm only looking for customers who are in either the data or point of sale market, that would pull these down. Again, this is all randomly generated data, so these aren't point of sale customers. So the next thing we'll probably want to do is, we don't necessarily care about each individual date. So I'm going to right click here and say group. And I want to group these by year and not necessarily by month. I'll click OK. And so now I just have 2016 and 2017. You can actually do both group. If I show both the months and the years, then I can use the little minus next to them to know how much data I have. So a lot of times when I'm calculating, and again, this is a pretty small data set, so very often I'll only have 8 months out of the year. And if I'm trying to forecast, well, I've got this number here, but it's only 8 months worth of data. Then I'll have a little column out to the side, and we'll cover this in red-green reports, but I'll have a column out to the side where I'll use this value, which is in this case E13, equals E13 divided by, if I said 7, then times 12, and that would give me a linear run rate based on this data. So now I have my customers. I can change filters by principal. Now, when I selected that, the selection is going to make it go out past this column right here. So it's saying, hey, I'm fixing to overwrite this value you calculated. Is that okay? I'm going to say yes. And see, now I have data for 16, 17, and what looks like 11 months of 18 in this data set. So there we go. Come back for lesson 8, which is common errors that we run into when we're creating this pivot table.